Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I am your host, Jordan Jones. It was another slow week in the world of Purdue athletics this past week as we're now approaching the month of July and we're nearing 2 months until football season kicks off. I got some really good feedback on last week's episode when I put all of the Big Ten basketball coaches into tiers, kind of breaking down the hierarchy of Big Ten basketball right now. Got a lot of good feedback on that, so if you haven't checked that out yet, be sure to give it a listen. Boilers and Beyond is available wherever you get your podcasts, so make sure to check that out. Something good to keep you busy during this off season. Because of that good feedback, today we're going to do a similar thing, and we're going to break down the Big Ten football coaches, putting them into tiers today. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about some of the news that came from this past week, although there wasn't a whole lot. We did find out that one Purdue student-athlete has tested positive for COVID-19. The sport that athlete plays is unspecified, so some schools have came out releasing that, X number of football players have tested positive or Y number of volleyball players have tested positive. Purdue is opting to not specify the sport which student-athletes who test positive participate in. I think that's a fairly decent idea. A little bit more privacy for the individual who tests positive, as well as, slightly a competitive advantage and a little bit better optics just for the school to not have that public attention if it is a football player who tested positive for COVID-19. They're keeping it private and just confined to a student-athlete. So we know that one has tested positive. I don't know how many players that affects in terms of contact tracing and causing players to go into self-quarantine, but that is something that we'll be keeping an eye on with Purdue Athletics as we get more athletes coming onto campus every Monday at this point, and with these off-season workouts, they are voluntary, but it seems that everyone's participating. We're really just going to have to keep an eye on this and see how many players do test positive and how that really impacts the Purdue football season. The NCAA this week made some more significant news by extending the recruiting dead period all the way to August 31st. This really, this applies to both football, basketball, and any sport really, but football and basketball are the main two where obviously people follow the recruiting and the recruiting rankings are tracked. This is going to be interesting because, it's very often that football recruits say that they want to have a decision made by the time they start their senior season of high school football. Well, at this point now, with no official in-person recruiting until August 31st, recruits aren't going to be able to visit college campuses until the start of September, and that's at the earliest, assuming the NCAA does not further extend the dead period. This is really going to cause, you would think, recruits to really speed up their commitments, especially those football players who would like to have a commitment done by the time they begin their senior season. For Purdue, this is kind of interesting news because Purdue does have the fewest commitments in the Big Ten thus far. They only have 9. Usually this time as we get into July and August is where your recruiting classes start to explode a little bit and you start getting those numbers up, pushing the 20 commitment number. We'll see for Purdue if this is a way that 2021 class can start to fill up a little bit more. They're at 9 commitments right now, all of whom are 3-star recruits, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. So it's going to be interesting to see, how this affects Purdue, because we've seen across all of college football, commitments are at an all-time high. We've got guys committing left and right. We've got some schools with 20-plus players committed for their 2021 class. I know in the Big Ten, Rutgers is leading the pack as Greg Schiano has already landed, I believe, 21 commitments for the 21 class. So it's going to be interesting to see how much these decommitments kind come into play. I think it's well presumed throughout college football media that, we're going to start seeing a lot of decommitments, players committing during quarantine when they were just bored. We're going to see if that really starts to happen, and there's a lot left to happen here in recruiting. In a subject that we're not going to talk about too much on Boilers and Beyond, but, it is interesting and noteworthy. Purdue women's basketball announced Monday on Twitter that Carissa McLaughlin, the former Indiana Miss Basketball point guard from Homestead in Fort Wayne, Indiana, will miss the entire 2020-21 basketball season due to an ankle surgery that she will be undergoing soon. This is going to be really big to follow. It's very well documented now that Purdue fans and the people who care about the women's basketball program are not thrilled with the direction of the program under Sharon Versip. Purdue has really fallen off here in the last 5 or so years, and losing your best player and by far your most marketable player is not necessarily a great way to kick off a season where, in all reality, Sharon Versip may be coaching for her job. This is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Obviously, women's basketball doesn't get the press that men's basketball does. It doesn't get the attendance by any means, but, regardless, with the impacts that COVID-19 is having on athletic departments and a presumed big impact on the upcoming season for Sharon Versip, we're going to have to see if schools are going to want to make changes in non-revenue sports. So we'll keep an eye on this situation for sure, but Carissa McLaughlin done for the year with an ankle injury. Massive loss for the Lady Boilers. And also on Monday, in the basketball world, the 2022 number 1 overall recruit Imani Bates has picked Michigan State as his destination for college basketball. He's a 6'8" small forward from Ypsilanti, Michigan. He has a perfect 1.00 rating by the 24/7 Sports Composite. I believe he's only the 7th player to ever earn that rating by the composite of perfect. Again, this is a weird situation now. Bates is considered to be one of the top recruits ever, in the same category as guys like LeBron James. Harrison Barnes was very highly recruited. Guys in some of those categories, Dwight Howard. So what are the chances he enrolls in East Lansing is my first question. I think it's got to be pretty low, especially if this NBA G League program turns out to be something successful, or at least not a total train wreck. I do think, though, what's interesting about Bates going to Michigan State is this is a big potential test for how much money a player can actually make off of their name, image, and likeness rights. It's no secret that, when a guy from in-state goes to an in-state school where he is going to be really popular, that increases his marketability. And Imani Bates will be the top recruit to ever enroll at Michigan State by the time he gets on campus in the fall of 2022, should that happen. You would think in the state of Michigan, Bates is going to have some really, really strong potential to earn a lot of money based off of his name and endorsement deals across the state. So, what does that look like? We'll find out. I don't know what to expect fully from this potential profitability for Bates, but, if this isn't a situation where a player views it to be worth it to go to college instead of the NBA G League, I think you're going to start seeing a trend where these really highly rated recruits decide to bail on college and go straight to the NBA, into the G League program, like we've seen Isaiah Todd do here in recent weeks. And I think we're going to keep seeing it a little bit. throughout the course of the next couple years. Now, we'll get into the main topic of today, the Big Ten football coaching tiers. It's going to be the same style as basketball. We're going to split these guys into 4 tiers. And the one thing that's worth pointing out here for football is I am only taking into account head coaching experience. Obviously, the Big Ten is full of coaches who were very successful coordinators at their previous stops before their current job, but we're only going to talk about head coaching experience today because I think all of these guys, or at least the vast majority, have done something as an offensive or defensive coordinator that makes them really stand out and makes them look like a really, really good coach, which they all are. You don't get these jobs by accident. But we're only going to talk about head coaching careers today, and we'll kick it off here in Tier 1. Have 3 names here, all from the Big Ten East. We'll start with James Franklin of Penn State. Just finished his 6th season in State College with a record of 56-23, and he's made 3 New Year's Six bowl appearances, which is pretty significant. That really means that, Penn State's among the probably 15 best programs in college football right now. It was a tough time to take over when Franklin left Vanderbilt to take over the job at Penn State. Bill O'Brien leaves after 2 years when the Nittany Lions were banned from playing in bowl games. They had scholarship restrictions when Franklin arrived. And by the time he was in his 3rd season at Penn State, the Nittany Lions were in the Rose Bowl playing against Southern Cal in an all-time classic out in Pasadena. In the last 4 seasons, 3 of those have ended with 11 wins for Penn State. Really, really consistent at this point. I think he's gotten now to a spot where, the only thing left to do is clear that hurdle of Ohio State. I don't know what expectations are out in Happy Valley. I think there is a ceiling here. I don't know that I see Penn State becoming a national title team. I think they're a solid step behind the programs like Alabama and Clemson at this point, and even Ohio State as well. Penn State's going to need to try to, get Ohio State at a good time, probably get them in State College and pull off that upset. And then Penn State's going to need to take care of their business the rest of the year too, because I don't think you're going to see Ohio State really giving up much more than 1 loss a year, maybe 2, anytime here in the near future. It is worth pointing out, though, how good Franklin was at Vanderbilt. That's what cements him as a Tier 1 coach here in my mind. 3 out of 3 years there, he made bowl games. That is unheard of in Nashville, as is his 24-15 record at at Vanderbilt. That's a program where success has been very, very hard to find. He was at Vanderbilt probably in a good time period to have some success when Georgia was still, in a little bit of fluctuation under Mark Ritt. Urban Meyer had left Florida, and they were struggling down there. But, regardless, going 9-4 at Vanderbilt is really, really hard. To do it 2 years in a row is an unbelievable feat. That cements James Franklin as a Tier 1 coach in the Big Ten, and I think really at this point it's just about taking that next step. To take that next step, as I said, they're going to have to get by Ohio State and head coach Ryan Day, who I have also in Tier 1. It is really hard to gauge a coach after his first year, and it's even harder to gauge a coach after his first year when he takes over one of the most talented rosters in the country after a fantastic coach, albeit a controversial coach, steps away and the job is handed to you after you've had experience coaching those guys as an interim coach. Day had a really good situation for his first year. He knocked it out of the park regardless, going 13-1, the 1 loss coming in a close college football playoff semifinal game against Clemson. But, regardless, he's in Tier 1, no doubt. He went 3-0 as the interim coach when Urban Meyer was suspended. Remember, that was because of the Zach Smith situation, which Urban Meyer lied about at Big Ten Media Days, resulting in his suspension. And then last year comes in with his first year as the full-time head coach and casually goes 13-1, undefeated in the Big Ten, and he was able to avoid the big-time losses that kept Ohio State out of the playoffs in 2017 and 2018 when they got blown out at Iowa and at Purdue, respectively. That was a really good step for them to avoid that loss. They got back in the playoffs, obviously struggled to hold on to an early lead against Clemson. Clemson comes back and gets the win. But he's recruiting out of his mind right now. Ohio State has the number one class in 2021, according to 24/7 Sports. Right now, they already have 4 commits by 5-star players. They have 11 more guys who are 4-star commits. They're still in the mix for a few more 5-stars. Right now, Ohio State's rolling on the recruiting trail, and really they're showing no signs of stopping on the field either. This is a program that's going to be winning double-digit games every year as far as I can see into the future. Right now, there's not a ton more that he can do at Ohio State to move up in coaching. Obviously, a national championship is going to be an expectation at some point, and I think it can happen. But really right now, the only thing holding Ryan Day back is getting over that hump of Clemson or Alabama and getting that national championship because, this is a loaded roster. They're going to be loaded for years to come. I don't see much happening here with Ryan Day at Ohio State. And then finally, this last one in Tier 1, going to be a little bit controversial, especially from our friends up north, but I've got Jim Harbaugh at the University of Michigan here as the final coach in Tier 1. In reality, if Ohio State wasn't succeeding at the level that they are, Jim Harbaugh would be praised really strongly for the work he's done in his first 5 years at Michigan. And it's crazy to think that he's already been there 5 years. It does not feel like it's been that long. But, he took over a struggling program. Rich Rodriguez was nowhere near what anyone thought. After he replaced Lloyd Carr, Rich Rod was gone in 3 years, followed by Brady Hoke coming in, having one great year, and then it going downhill really quick from there. But, Harbaugh's come in and he has solidified that program. In 5 years there, Michigan's had 3 10-win seasons. And, especially that 2016 season where the Wolverines missed out on what would have likely been a playoff berth when J.T. Barrett got that first down on a close 4th-and-1 call in overtime against Ohio State. That's as close to the top as Michigan has been since 2006 when them and Ohio State were 1-2 late in the year. And besides that, it's been since 1997 when Michigan won their last national championship that they've been anywhere near that close to the top. Harbaugh's recruiting really well also. You can see a consistent theme here in Tier 1 that all of these coaches, they get it done on the recruiting trail. They're bringing great talent into their programs, and that's why you see these guys in Tier 1, because with the best talent, you're going to have the best success. And Jim Harbaugh's done that well. He's done it in a weird way. Obviously, the satellite camps, when he first got to Michigan, was introducing those. That was very controversial, got a ton of attention from the media. But now, that's looking a little bit more normalized. It's looking like things that, could keep happening in college football. And he made big head waves when he had a sleepover at a recruit's house. But that's how Harbaugh is. He's not going to stop at anything to build a winner at Michigan. And, you have to look, too, with these guys, what they've done at other schools. And Harbaugh is very decorated elsewhere. Obviously, he led the 49ers to a Super Bowl appearance, but, that was after he really changed the trajectory of Stanford football. he took him to the Orange Bowl. That's not something that Stanford football ever did. And, Andrew Luck obviously was a great quarterback for Harbaugh out there. And, that's a huge recruit to get. He stockpiled that program well for David Shaw to take over. And you saw early on in his career at Stanford, Harbaugh took over for a 1-11 program. And in that first year, took down a USC team on a Thursday night game who had Mark Sanchez at quarterback. Southern Cal was a top 5 team at that point. Stanford went into the Coliseum and beat them. And before Stanford, Harbaugh got his start out at the University of San Diego, where football scholarships aren't even allowed. The Pioneer Football League and the FCS is the one league where, scholarships for football don't happen. Here in Indiana, we see that league a little bit because Butler and Valparaiso are both members. And San Diego consistently kills both those teams, but he coached a future NFL quarterback there in Josh Johnson. And, Harbaugh has really just been a successful coach everywhere he's been. At San Diego, he won 2 conference championships in his 3 years, was never able to participate in the FCS playoff because at that time, the Pioneer League was not eligible to compete in the playoff because they didn't offer football scholarships. That has since changed, but, Harbaugh really dominated that league for the 3 years he was there. That rounds out Tier 1 now. We're going to move into Tier 2, and, some of these guys are really close to Tier 1, and some of these guys are, fringe Tier 3, but, first off, I have Paul Chryst at Wisconsin. Chryst was an interesting hire at the time. Gary Anderson decided to leave Wisconsin after just a couple years replacing Brett Bielema, and Chryst comes in after 3 years at Pitt where he had 3 6-6 regular seasons. And, that was when Pitt had not fully joined the ACC yet, if I remember correctly. So, it's not like Pitt was playing a bunch of world killers, and, he didn't do great there. Comes to Wisconsin. He was the OC at Wisconsin for 7 years under Alvarez and Brett Bielema. And so far in his first 5 years in Madison, he's been fantastic. A 52-16 record. He's just missed the 2017 playoff. Their only loss that year was a really close game to Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship back when Alex Hornibrook was the quarterback for the Badgers. He's won the Big Ten West 3 out of his 5 seasons, 3 New Year's Six Bowl appearances in 5 seasons. Paul Chryst has built a really, really good program there. He maintained all of the momentum that Anderson, Bielema, and Alvarez started before him. It's really hard to get 4 straight good coaching hires. Wisconsin has done it, and that's why their program is at the point where they are now, as pretty much every year the favorite to win the Big Ten West preseason. In order to get to Tier 1, in my opinion, Chryst needs to get that elusive Big Ten title, needs to get a year where he can get to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game and take down whoever comes out of the East, assuming it's going to be Ohio State every year. But, whoever that team is, Chryst needs to get through 1 year, and then I will put him in Tier 1. Another guy here who has really just built a really consistently strong program is Iowa's Kirk Ferentz. He's now the longest tenured coach in college football. He's been at Iowa for 21 years now. Ferentz won 2 Big Ten championships at Iowa thus far, back in 2002 and 2004. In 2015, Ferentz won a Western Division title. Look, in 21 years, Ferentz has only missed a bowl game 4 times, and 2 of those times were his first 2 seasons at Iowa. The consistency in Iowa City is incredible. He took over for a legend in Hayden Fry, and he kept it going incredibly, incredibly well. he stuck to that style of play, smash mouth football, physical, big offensive line, run the ball, make plays on defense, and just, beating these teams and, putting up 8-9 wins a year in the Big Ten West. Obviously, here in the recent month or so, we've seen some controversy surrounding Ferentz. That's the most he's dealt with in 21 years in Iowa City. That's pretty good. To not have a lot of controversy surrounding player discipline or anything like that. He's had a really good run there. Look, he's a guy you could put in Tier 1, and I think he'd be fully justified too. For me, it's been, over 15 years now since Ferentz has won a Big Ten title, and only 1 year since then did he come close in 2015. That's why I keep him down here in Tier 2, but, regardless, Ferentz has done an excellent job in Iowa City, and, I hope, despite some of the controversy recently, I hope he can have a successful ending here and kind of coach his way out and end on top. Now, another guy who gets a good amount of love from the media, the national college football media, for what he's done at his school, and that's Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern. Fitz took over right after the sudden death of Randy Walker back in the mid-2000s, and in the last 14 years, Fitz has already set the school record for coaching wins in a career. He's 99-77. And by far, Fitz is the best coach in Northwestern history. Northwestern's only won 10 games in a season 4 times since the early 1900s. One of those years came when Fitz was playing at Northwestern, and the other 3 have came when Fitz was a head coach at Northwestern. They've made 9 bowl games under Pat Fitzgerald's tenure. Before he began coaching at Northwestern, they'd only made 6 bowl games ever. He's turned down potential jobs to stay at Northwestern. Obviously, a couple years ago, you may remember the rumor of the Green Bay Packers having interest in Fitz, but he turned that down. Talking to Joel Klatt after a bowl game, said, "No way, I'm not going anywhere. Go Cats," is his customary remark, but Fitz has been a model of consistency. I know they were down last year. They had a rough year, but, I fully expect them to bounce back. And, just a really incredible job by Pat Fitzgerald to stabilize a program that has only been stable when they've been at the bottom before. So, him at Tier 2 is a no-brainer. And if based on those accomplishments, considering it's Northwestern, someone wanted to put him in Tier 1, I would have no problem with that. I think that's well justified. Finally, I have a tough one here in Tier 2, and that's PJ Fleck at Minnesota. I don't know how fair it is to put him in Tier 2 already, just because he's only been there for 3 years, but he did come into a decent situation at Minnesota. It was a little controversial. Obviously, Tracy Claeys' firing was not ideal. A tough look for Minnesota, where, he was supporting his players after some criminal charges against them, and that caused his firing. But, for PJ Fleck, he came in and struggled his first year, got to a bowl in year 2, they won it, and then in 2019, in his 3rd year, they come out and go 11-2. I believe they started either 9-0 or 10-0. Really, really did a great job in 2019. He's recruiting really well there. He established himself on the recruiting trail when he was at Western Michigan. Got a lot of really good talent to Kalamazoo there. And he had a great tenure at Western Michigan as well. He went from 1-11 to 13-1. In a span of just 4 years, won 30 games in 4 years. That's pretty hard to do, especially in the MAC where it's usually fairly volatile. But got to a New Year's Six Bowl in 2016 when they ran the table in the regular season. Lost to Wisconsin in that Cotton Bowl, but regardless, done a really good job as a head coach. I would not say he's a well-liked guy by any means. I think the row the boat mantra and the constant wearing the tie on the sidelines, I think, fans get tired of his antics. But, regardless, he's a really good coach, and he's done some really, really good things at Minnesota. That brings me to Tier 3, where we'll kick things off for all the Purdue listeners here with Jeff Brohm. And I have him in Tier 3 because we haven't seen a ton of, we've seen him at 6-6 twice. Last year, tough year, obviously. You can attribute all of that to injuries. And I fully believe that, Jeff Brohm's going to bounce back this year and have a good year. He took over Purdue at a god-awful time. Darrell Hazel's tenure at Purdue was abysmal. Winning 9 games in 3.5 seasons is unacceptable at any level. But, let's not forget that Hazel took over after Purdue went to a bowl. That says just how bad the Darrell Hazel era was. Brohm did have a winning record in all 3 seasons at Western Kentucky, down in the Conference USA before making the jump to West Lafayette. Look, to get to Tier 2, I don't think Brohm is that far off. I do think bowl games need to become consistent, and he's not doing himself any favors by scheduling a brutal out-of-conference schedule. But they need to push for 7-8 regular season wins a year. 7-5, 8-4. Maybe that's the ceiling at Purdue. Maybe it's not. But getting to that level, that'll get Jeff Brohm to Tier 2. And we've seen the interest that other schools have had in Jeff Brohm. We had a little bit of Tennessee rumors back in 2017. In 2018, Brohm to Louisville was obviously a massive report that took a couple days for Purdue fans just sitting on Twitter all day long waiting to find an answer. And he decided to stay at Purdue. And I think he'll get Purdue to that Tier 2 level, but it's going to take another year. And then following him up, I'm staying in the state of Indiana with Tom Allen. I think between Brohm and Allen right now, we're seeing the best these two programs have ever been simultaneously. Now, Indiana, obviously the Bill Mallory years were really good, and for Purdue, the Joe Tiller years were really good. But we haven't seen a whole lot of time where Purdue and Indiana have both been good at the same time. We're getting there now. The bucket games aren't going to be, just a battle for the state championship, more or less. We're going to start seeing bowl game implications here. And, I guess potentially, maybe at some point, Purdue for the Big Ten West being a factor in the bucket game. But, Allen is only 18-20 in 3 seasons at IU. The Big Ten East is a tough division, no doubt about it. And it may be the best division in college football. I think it's right up there with the SEC West. But, he's taken the right approach to build a winner there. Allen is scheduling wins in non-conference, and he's recruiting the state of Indiana. That's the 2 easiest ways to start developing a program. Allen is doing it well. Now next up is that big win. He's beaten the teams he needs to. He did that last year. They almost had their bowl win, but he needs that big regular season win. It's going to come at some point against a Michigan, an Ohio State, or a Penn State. This year they opened the season at Wisconsin. Maybe that's a chance for it, but sometime here in the next year or two, I do think Allen's going to get that win. And also, Indiana needs to win a bowl game. We're almost to 30 years now since Indiana's won a bowl game. It's been since 1991. They've lost 5 straight bowl games, had a heartbreaking loss in the Gator Bowl last year. Eventually, they've got to break through and get that bowl win. I do think Allen's the guy to do it. I do think he's going to do a really good job here at Indiana. He's already done so, and I think it's going to continue. Now we go from a guy who's probably exceeded expectations in Allen to a guy who has not met expectations so far, and that is Scott Frost of Nebraska. Look, there's just a major disparity between the expectations and reality here. I think that's applicable to both Scott Frost and the entire state of the Nebraska football program. At 9-15 through 2 seasons at Nebraska, Frost has really struggled. He's gotten off to a slow start. I wouldn't say that Mike Riley left the program in a great position, but this is still a little concerning for Nebraska fans. I always thought at the time when they fired Bo Pelini after the 2014 or 2015 season, I think 2015, that Nebraska's going to regret this because you fired a coach who goes 9-3 every year, and Nebraska just hasn't gotten back there. The expectations in year 2 were incredible, even to the point where they were predicted to win the Big Ten West and miserably failed at that, going 3-6 in conference, losing to Purdue on their third-string quarterback, losing to Indiana in Lincoln. A really bad year for Scott Frost. Look, his UCF transformation was impressive, but the American Athletic Conference and the Big Ten are just not the same. I'm sorry. He's in a hotbed in Orlando for recruiting. He is not in Lincoln, Nebraska. I just don't know at this point. I think Scott Frost can do it. I think that program can develop, but the Nebraska fans have to be realistic about their expectations here. I think they can get to a Big Ten championship game, sure, but I don't know how realistic it is to think that Nebraska is going to be a playoff contender. I don't know that I see that now or ever in the future. I just don't know. There's no recruiting base there. It's a really tough spot to build at, especially now that you're competing against so many coaches that I've named above Scott Frost here. So tough times out there in Lincoln. That brings us to Lovie Smith at Illinois. And I think he's really hard to pinpoint here because the NFL success counts. Lovie Smith got to a Super Bowl with the Bears, another NFC championship game with the Bears. He never should have been fired by the Bears. But how much does that success matter in terms of putting him into a tier for college football coaches? Look, he's 15-34 through 4 seasons. That's really bad. That's not good. The improvement in year 4 was noted. They got to a bowl game, but they had a massive comeback against Michigan State and a massive upset against Wisconsin. If you take those 2 away, they're 4-8. And at this point, I do think it's important to manage expectations. Again, Lovie's another guy who came into a tough spot because, the Tim Beckman era ended really poorly and very suddenly, and, Bill Cubit just wasn't the long-term solution. I don't know what the expectations are from Illinois administration or Illinois fans in terms of the trajectory of the program, but, it is interesting to point out that for whatever reason, Lovie has not been able to recruit the state of Illinois. Last year in the 2020 class, Illinois did not sign a single player from the land of Lincoln. It's bizarre to me. I don't know how that happens, especially with Chicago just 3 hours north. But, for Lovie Smith to get up to tier 2, he's just going to need to keep making bowl games. They did it last year, went out to California for a bowl. Yes, they got smoked by Cal, but they just got to keep building out there and keep putting together 6-7 win seasons in Champaign. Finally, to round out tier 3, another guy who's really hard to pinpoint because of past experience that I don't know how applicable it is. That's Greg Schiano at Rutgers. Look, he was great in his first tenure at Rutgers. In 11 seasons there, went 68-67 in the Big East at the time. Got him to 6 bowl games. I believe it was 6 bowls in 7 years to wrap up his time there. He bounced from Rutgers, went to the NFL, and really struggled down in Tampa Bay. Was fired after 2 years before coming back to the college coaching ranks to be a coordinator again. Look, I have a hard time judging how relevant Greg Schiano's experience at Rutgers while they were in the Big East is. Yes, he had some really good teams there. He had some big moments, especially when they took down Louisville on the Thursday night, the pandemonium in Piscataway. But, all of his Big East success came towards the end of the Big East Conference after, Miami had left, Virginia Tech had left, and Boston College had left. After those three went to the ACC and really took, all the three best football programs out of there and left Rutgers competing in the Big East with a lot of, basketball-heavy schools. So I don't know how relevant it is. Obviously, he did a great job. I'm not taking that away from him because, his first tenure at Rutgers is the best that anyone's ever done in Piscataway. But he has a long, long road ahead of him just to make Rutgers competitive in the Big Ten East. I don't think Rutgers competing for a Big Ten East championship should be even on the radar right now. I think getting to a point where Rutgers can schedule a light non-conference and get into a bowl game at 6-6, that'd be something really worth celebrating at this point because Rutgers hasn't made a bowl since 2014. Expectations need to be tampered here, and this one's a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint out in Piscataway. But that rounds out Tier 3. And then down in Tier 4, look, there's two coaches in the Big Ten who have proved nothing, who haven't really had a ton of chances to prove themselves. I've got them at Tier 4 because I have doubts about, the potential for winning, and I just have doubts about them managing expectations. Number one, really, I think the expectations are through the roof for, and that's Mel Tucker at Michigan State. He's replacing Mark D'Antonio. That's going to be really hard. D'Antonio had a ton of success at Michigan State. He got him to a college football playoff, got him to some Rose Bowls. Yes, there were tons of off-the-field issues. I think that's ultimately what got D'Antonio out of that job, was that Michigan State players could not, stay out of trouble in East Lansing. But at the same time, Mel Tucker's making, I think, $6 million a year, and he's got another $5 million in his assistant coach salary pool. I mean, that's unbelievable stuff for a coach who has 1 year of head coaching experience out in Colorado, where he only went 5-7. Yeah, I know he was a great defensive coordinator at Georgia, but he had Roquan Smith in the linebacking core and Dominic Sanders back in the secondary, and some guys who were unbelievable college football players. I just don't know about giving him that much money leaving Colorado. And it was obvious that it was a move out of desperation because Luke Fickell didn't work out. He wouldn't leave Cincinnati. So, at this point, the expectations are going to be high. 5-7 at Colorado, which I just struggle because I don't think Mike McIntyre left that program out in Boulder in such a bad spot. But, with the amount of money going to Mel Tucker, this is not a spot where winning 7 to 8 games a year is going to be viewed as acceptable. If it is, Michigan State's throwing money away. He's going to be expected to come in and win the Big Ten East every year. I have my doubts, to say the least. And we'll wrap up our coaching tier rankings today with Mike Locksley at Maryland. And he's really down in Tier 4. He had a rough year to start off at Maryland, but he's really down here because of his coaching experience at New Mexico. He went 2-26 in 2.5 years out in Albuquerque. Wow. I didn't realize that, honestly. I had forgotten about that. I knew he was the coach there for a little bit, but had completely forgotten that he was even at New Mexico when they were that bad. I did not realize that New Mexico went 2-26 under Locksley. It's not an easy job. It's not much of a recruiting base, but wow. It's really tough to tell about Locksley at Maryland now. Look, DJ Durkin's ending was messy, to say the least. I think it set back the program a year or two. But, it's simple at Maryland. There's a blueprint. It's not an easy blueprint to follow, but you have to recruit Washington, D.C. You have to recruit Baltimore. That is your only chance of survival. And, he got one guy, a highly rated wide receiver recruit from that area in the 2020 class. He's going to need more of those. You can't just have one. You can't just get one a year. He's really got to start controlling that market. And that's the only way he's going to get things to work at Maryland, because in the Big Ten East, you're up against a stacked deck with Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan on the schedule every single year. That's all I have for today. Thank you for tuning into the show. I appreciate all of you who listen to the show. Make sure to subscribe, because Boilers and Beyond is available wherever you get your podcasts. The show's on Twitter. Give us a follow at Boilers Beyond. And let me know what you thought about this week's episode. We'll be back next Tuesday for more of the biggest news and high-level analysis of Purdue athletics, so be sure to tune in then. Until then, stay safe.